Hello, I'm Mrunmayee Amshekar from IIT Kanpur. I have been working on this paper with Dr. Chaithra Puttaswamy. The topic of today's presentation is evolution of linguistic archiving in India. The flow of the presentation is as follows: introduction, followed by a brief discussion of the methodology used in the study, then discussion about developments in the process of documentation in India. Then we report the responses to the survey that we conducted in the process of the study. Then we review the centers for endangered languages in India and also archives in India. Then we conclude with some concluding remarks. So, as acknowledged by leading researchers working in language documentation and archiving is still a relatively new domain. As the goals of language documentation began to shift from being description-centric to community-centric, archiving for preservation has taken the center stage. Henke and Beres-Kroeker note that although documentary linguistics rose as a field from the 1990s, archiving became a core component of the process in the early 21st century. So the study of Indian languages also imitates the global patterns in that the early focus has been on description of languages. For example, grammars produced as a part of lingua descriptive series, and then it shifted. So in this presentation, we observe the evolution of documentary goals and situate archiving in the Indian linguistic scenario. This is an exploratory study and the following methods were employed in the study. First is survey of existential grammars and articles to scope out the goals of documentation and the place of archiving. Second, an online questionnaire consisting of 21 questions grouped into 4 sections: awareness about archives and questions for archive users, archive depositors, and archivists was floated among the linguistic community via Google Forms to survey the patterns of knowledge and use of archives by linguists. The third was personal communication, where researchers affiliated to centers for endangered languages and libraries and archivists were interviewed via email and over the phone to find out about the archiving practices and perspectives on archiving in India. The findings of this study will now be discussed. Owing to limited awareness and means, the documentary practices of linguistic work in India were limited to elicitation and creation of field notes published in the form of papers and books, accessible only to a limited set of audience. Descriptive grammars were the central and often the only outcome of documentary works, and although this hasn't changed completely, methodological advancements and increased awareness are observed in documentation, description, and archiving. So these include adoption of a variety of linguistic and non-linguistic prompt-based documentation methods accompanied by audio and video recording. Then language documentation in collaboration with communities like Bogun, Toda, communities from Sikkim and North Bengal, and emergence of new archives, sometimes in collaboration with communities again. And outcomes of such developments, although on a small scale, will be discussed in the next part of the presentation. So, the survey that we conducted received 27 responses from students, researchers, and professors working in the domain of linguistics in India. This survey is representative and it may belie the existent awareness and usage patterns. However, we proceed with the available numbers as indicative due to lack of a wider set of data. Although the survey consisted of 4 sections, we will discuss the results of 2 of them: awareness about archives and their use. So the first section is awareness, and there were 2 questions seeking information about awareness about the archives. So first is, are you aware of any language archives? So for this question, a majority of people responded with a yes. And for the second question, which was, which of the following archives are you aware of? There were a few options like the Central Institute of Indian Languages, ELAR, Korsal, DOBS, Paradisec, etc. So CIIL is the most widely known archive, followed by ELAR and Corsal. The next section was of use. So 5 questions related to usage based on whether the researcher has ever used an archive and knowing the purpose of their use. So 2/3 of respondents reported using an archive, with 1/3 saying that they used it for their own research, with others saying that they have used archives for teaching or visited them out of curiosity. Again, in this section also, CIIL, tailed by ELAR and Corsal, is the most used repository. So respondents also reported that they do possess archivable material in the form of, say, audio recordings, field notebooks, flex files, etc. But the primary reason which deterred users from depositing to archives were that the process is time consuming and that the archive interface is not very familiar. This is also an issue discussed by Nathan in the 2014 article. So the survey indicates that linguists are well aware of the existence of archives and use them. Having looked at the awareness and use of archives, let's now look at the Centers for Endangered Languages in India. So several Indian universities have established centers to study endangered languages with the help of government funding. Over the years, these centers have hosted a lot of small documentation projects, and the data that is presented in the following slides represents centers and their work that is traceable through internet search. The first map maps out various centers for endangered languages across different locations in India. In terms of the outputs of the documentation projects conducted by these centers, there seems to be no standard criteria. So the following map marks centers which have published material in the form of books. So say lexicon, descriptive grammars, etc. On this slide, we map out how different centers have handled the data that they documented. So as can be seen from the map on the screen, more than half of the centers have not digitally archived the data that they collected. So these can be seen in the orange bubbles. Then 2 have uploaded a few videos on YouTube, which can be seen in the purple bubbles. There is one center which created an archive, but the archive could not go open access due to various hurdles. However, apps for some dictionaries created as a part of the project at the center are present on their website. This center is shown in blue, and there is only one center which has an open access archive created with community participation, that is known as SIDHELA, the Sikkim Darjeeling Himalayas Endangered Language Archive, which is shown in the yellow bubble. We now look at the functional archives in India. It was confirmed through our survey that there exist only 2 functional open access archives. We briefly discuss them here. The first is SIDHELA, Sikkim Darjeeling Himalayas Endangered Language Archive. So this is an archive created by Center for Endangered Languages, Sikkim University. It was funded by the University Grants Commission, and the center collaborated with indigenous communities to create collections for the languages Gujel, Gurung, Magar, Rai Rogdu, and Sherpa. This archive is currently managed by the University Library. The second is the Scheme for Protection and Preservation of Endangered Languages program. So this program was created by the Central Institute of Indian Languages, and it has a pan-India coverage. So the program collaborated with various universities and institutes across India involving linguists, folklorists, and language archivists. Archiving is one of the goals of this program, and work is underway to create an open access archive for the languages documented. We are towards the concluding section of this presentation. So, large projects funded by government agencies or external funding bodies have shown various degrees of intent to archive the data, but only a few have managed to create a functional open access archive. A suggestion in this direction is to encourage collaborations with the communities through centers for endangered languages, similar to the Sidhela model. From the survey results, it is indicated that researchers are aware of archives and use them regularly. However, the dearth of accepting archives and of institutional archives, which accept data from projects not funded by them, is a hurdle in archiving. So, one potential solution is like Corsal, which accepts material from field methods courses. Universities can plan to archive the field data collected by their students. So one possible way is to prepare the university libraries to host digital data, if possible in the form of an open access archive. And then the libraries can have a dedicated documentation officer in charge of maintaining the archive collections. As mentioned before, this is an exploratory study of archives, looking at how archiving has received a central role in the process of documentation, and archives have emerged as a result over the years. The study also sought a peek into the awareness and usage of archives. So what could be done next is to propose feasible solutions for facilitating open access archiving at institutional level, and how archives could become more user-friendly for depositors and more accessible to communities across the country also needs to be studied. These are our references. We are towards the end of the presentation. Thank you all.